A timer set 500,000 years ago beeped aboard the human command ship in deep space, activating an emergency beacon that blared a signal out to the cosmos. A desperate call from the last remnants of humanity, letting the universe know the time for vengeance had come at last. For millennia, this secret fleet had drifted undetected through the galaxy's fringes. Aboard the ships, generations of humans were born, lived, and died, all united in their mission to one day avenge the destruction of Earth by the ruthless Kazan and their Galactic Council. Captain Jason Kennedy stood on the bridge of the command vessel as the timer reached zero. Though over 500,000 years old chronologically, cryogenic suspension had preserved his body at its prime, while he slept away the centuries. But nothing could preserve the hatred burning in his heart for the aliens who exterminated his species. When the Kazan obliterated humanity's homeworld, a few thousand survivors escaped on a ragtag fleet of ships, fleeing to the stars just before the nukes fell. Under Kennedy's command, the survivors went into hiding, biding their time, knowing direct confrontation against the Council's military might was suicide. But now, 500,000 years later, the beacon broadcast a coded signal to any other humans still out there. A rallying cry to all the children of Earth that the day of reckoning was finally at hand. It was time to strike back. As the human fleet powered up its engines and Kennedy prepared his people for war, light years away on the Kazan homeworld, the beady eyes of Emperor Corvus narrowed as his comms system intercepted an impossible signal. The humans were still alive. The Emperor clenched his fists in rage, cursing that some humans escaped his genocide so long ago. He vowed to correct that mistake, to scour the galaxy until every last man, woman, and child was nothing but ash. Corvus bellowed orders to his generals, and the mighty Kazan armada leapt into hyperspace, locking onto the human signal, racing to deliver the killing blow to Kennedy's fleet. The final battle for humanity's survival was about to unfold between a species that once ruled the Earth and the aliens that burned their world. Captain Jason Kennedy stared at the view screen as the Kazan armada dropped out of hyperspace, a vast swarm of warships filling the void. The Kazan fleet outnumbered the human ships 20-1, their vessels dripping with advanced weaponry that had been steadily upgraded over the 500,000 years since the fall of Earth. In contrast, Kennedy's fleet still relied on the same aging warships they had escaped with centuries ago. The comms crackled as damage reports flooded in from the human ships. Kennedy could hear the barely restrained panic in his crew's voices. They all knew this was a battle they could not win head-on. Kennedy's mind raced, analyzing and discarding strategies with lightning speed. Then, in a moment of clarity, a plan took shape, desperate, audacious, but the only chance for their survival. He opened a fleet-wide channel. All ships, prepare to execute Emergency Plan Omega on my mark. Command ship and Alpha Wing with me. Everyone else, scatter and jump to fallback points. Do not wait for my signal. Trust the plan. Confusion and fear rippled across the bridge as the implications sank in. Kennedy was splitting up the fleet, leaving only a token force to face the Armada's wrath. Lieutenant Chen spoke up, her voice tight. "Sir, we can't just leave you." "You have your orders, Lieutenant," Kennedy cut her off. "The fleet must survive. Scatter the ships, now." With a chorus of acknowledgments, the fleet dispersed into hyperspace, vanishing in bursts of light, until only Kennedy's command ship and a squadron of fighters remained to face the Kazan horde. Emperor Corvus watched the human fleet scatter with a predatory grin. "The cowards flee," he hissed. "Chase them down. Burn every last one from the stars." But as the Kazan ships moved to pursue, Kennedy's command ship and fighters surged forward in a brazen charge, heading straight for Corvus's flagship. The Emperor snarled in surprise. "What is this insanity? Crush them!" The human ships wove and dodged through a hurricane of fire, their shields straining as they closed on the Kazan flagship. But this suicidal charge served its purpose. The Kazan fleet was forced to turn and defend their Emperor, unable to pursue the fleeing humans. As they entered weapons range, the human ships unleashed a salvo of strange missiles that arced and twisted in impossible trajectories. Corvus sneered, expecting his shields to easily absorb the barrage. But to his shock, The projectiles phase-shifted through the flagship's defenses as if they didn't exist, striking the hull and sending tremors ripping through the ship. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks as power fluctuated wildly. Kennedy saw his chance. "Alpha Wing, target their shield emitters. Breaching pods on me." As the fighters strafed the flagship, the command ship launched a volley of pods that punctured the crippled Kazon shields and drilled into the hull. With a shudder, the pods cracked open, and Kennedy and his elite commandos stormed onto the enemy ship. Aboard the Kazan flagship, the once pristine corridors devolved into a nightmarish war zone as human and Kazan forces clashed in brutal close-quarters combat. The ship's tight confines negated the Kazan's numerical advantage, forcing them into a vicious meat grinder where Kennedy's hardened veterans held the edge. Slowly, inexorably, the humans pushed towards the bridge, leaving a trail of Kazan bodies in their wake. As they breached the final blast doors, Corvus found himself face-to-face with the human who had orchestrated this audacious assault. In that moment, Corvus saw something in Kennedy's eyes that shook him to his core, not just raw hatred, but the unyielding willpower of a soldier fighting for the survival of his species. The two leaders traded blows in a vicious duel, Corvus's augmented strength pitted against Kennedy's honed skills. Both warriors took wounds, blood splattering the deck, but it was Corvus who finally staggered back, overwhelmed by the human's relentless onslaught. With a final slash, Kennedy's blade found a gap in the Emperor's armor, sending him crashing to the deck. Corvus glared up at the human towering over him, hate etched in every line of his face. "Finish it then," he spat. "Take your vengeance." Kennedy's grip tightened on his blade, the temptation to end his foe almost overwhelming. But instead, he shook his head. "No. I want you to live with this defeat. I want you to know that when you destroyed our world, you failed to break our spirit. Humanity will rise again, Corvus, and we're coming for you and your precious counsel." With that, Kennedy turned and strode away, leaving a bloodied Corvus to slink to an escape pod as the flagship burned around him. Regrouping with the scattered fleet, Kennedy allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. They had struck a blow against their destroyers and lived to fight another day. But he knew this was only the beginning. Corvus would not rest until every human was nothing but dust. As he met with his captains to plan their next moves, Kennedy couldn't shake a sense of unease. Something felt wrong, like a splinter in his mind. It was only hours later that the terrible realization hit him. Not everyone had made it back from the flagship. Unbeknownst to Jason, some of his soldiers had been captured during the fighting, dragged away to Kazon cells for interrogation, and worse. The war had begun, but the odds were still stacked against the last of humanity. As the fleet paused to lick its wounds and prepare for the long fight ahead, Kennedy could only pray that the captives would hold out long enough for him to find a way to save them. Their fates and the future of the human race hung in the balance. The command deck buzzed with activity as Kennedy and his top officers hunched over holographic star charts. "We can't outrun them forever," Commander Rodriguez said, gesturing at the blinking red icons representing Kazon pursuit ships. "Sooner or later they'll catch us in open space." Kennedy nodded grimly. "That's why we need to hit them where it hurts. Cripple their ability to wage war." He called up schematics of massive orbital shipyards circling a blue-green world. "Intelligence confirms 3 major Kazon construction facilities in the Ocampa system. If we can take those out, we buy ourselves time." Lieutenant Marcus Kane leaned forward, studying the defenses. "Sir, with respect, that's suicide. Those shipyards are more heavily guarded than the Emperor's bedchambers." "Not if we use stealth insertions," Kennedy replied. "Small teams, minimal footprint. Get in, plant charges, get out before they know what hit them." Kane's eyes lit up as he grasped the audacity of the plan. "Who did you have in mind to lead this op, Captain?" Kennedy clapped him on the shoulder. "I was hoping you'd volunteer." Hours later, Kane's strike team drifted silently through the void in matte black stealth ships. As they neared Ocampa, the massive shipyards came into view, skeletal frameworks stretching for kilometers, swarming with construction drones and half-built warships. Kane's voice crackled over the encrypted comm. Split up and hit your assigned targets. Plant charges, then rendezvous at the extraction point. Move fast and quiet. The team scattered, using sensor-jamming tech to slip past patrols. Kane's own unit breached an airlock and ghosted through dimly lit corridors. They placed high-yield explosives at key structural points, fingers hovering near detonators. When the charges blew, the shipyards erupted in a spectacular series of explosions. Kane watched from his stealth ship as uncompleted Kazan vessels tore apart, debris raining down on Ocampa's atmosphere in fiery streaks. "All teams, report in," Kane ordered as they regrouped at the extraction point. "Alpha team clear. Bravo team clear. Charlie team," static cut across the channel. Kane's heart raced. "Charlie team, come in." No response came. They'd lost people, but the mission was a success. As they jumped to hyperspace, Kane knew the Kazan would be out for blood. Back on the command ship, Kennedy pored over after-action reports when an alert chimed. "Sir, we're receiving an encrypted transmission. Origin unknown." Kennedy's brow furrowed as he read the message. A dissident group, sympathetic to humanity? It seemed too good to be true, but the intel they provided on a secret Kazan bioweapons lab was too valuable to ignore. He summoned Kane to his ready room. "I need you to take another team in. This time we're hitting a research facility where they're allegedly studying our captured soldiers." Kane nodded grimly. "Consider it done, sir. We'll get our people back." As Kane's team approached the barren moon housing the lab, tension filled the air. They'd pushed deep into enemy territory, and stealth was their only defense. One wrong move could bring the entire Kazan armada down on their heads. Kane signaled his squad as they neared the entrance. "Remember, we're here to rescue our people and destroy any bioweapons research. Let's move." With a silent prayer, they breached the airlock and plunged into the facility. Kane's team moved swiftly through the shadows of the Kazan facility. They took out the perimeter guards with silent efficiency, their stealth suits blending seamlessly into the darkness. As they approached the main entrance, Kane signaled his squad to halt. "Rodriguez, hack the door. Chen, watch our six," he whispered. Rodriguez's fingers flew over his holopad, bypassing security protocols. The massive doors slid open with a soft hiss. As they entered, alarms blared. Kazan soldiers poured into the corridor, plasma bolts sizzling through the air. "Take cover!" Kane shouted, diving behind a console. The team returned fire, their weapons set to maximum lethality. Kazan bodies dropped, but more kept coming. Kane lobbed a stun grenade, temporarily clearing their path. "Move! We need to find the holding cells." They fought their way deeper into the complex, leaving a trail of unconscious and dead Kazan in their wake. Finally, they reached a heavily fortified door. "This is it," Kane said, planting breaching charges. The explosion rocked the facility. As the smoke cleared, they stormed in, weapons ready. What they saw made their blood run cold. Humans in various states of emaciation were strapped to medical tables, surrounded by gruesome equipment. Among the prisoners, Kane recognized a familiar face. "Lieutenant Commander Mendoza?" She lifted her head weakly. "Kane, is that really you?" As his team worked to free the captives, Kane helped Mendoza to her feet. Despite her frail condition, her eyes burned with intensity. "Listen," she rasped, "they're after our DNA. They're trying to create a bioweapon that targets humans specifically." Before Kane could respond, the facility rocked with explosions. "Reinforcements," he cursed. "We need to move, now." They began evacuating the prisoners, Kane's team forming a protective cordon. Plasma bolts filled the air as Kazan forces closed in. Lethir Hayes provided covering fire, allowing the others to reach the extraction point. Suddenly, Hayes cried out in pain, a bolt catching him in the leg. Kane didn't hesitate. He slung Hayes over his shoulder, running for the shuttles while returning fire one-handed. "Go, go, go!" Kane yelled as the last of the prisoners were loaded. With everyone aboard, Kane's demolition team set the charges. They barely cleared the blast radius as the facility erupted in a massive fireball behind them. Back on the command ship, Kane delivered his report to Kennedy. The captain's face grew grim as he listened. "So they're closer to a bioweapon than we thought," Kennedy said, his voice heavy. Kane nodded. Mendoza's intel could be crucial for developing countermeasures. Kennedy sighed, then straightened. "You've done well, Kane. You and Hayes are both getting commendations for this." Later, as Kane visited Hayes in the medbay, a message came through. The dissidents had more targets for them. Kennedy called a war council. The command deck buzzed with tense energy as captains gathered around the hollow table. "We've struck significant blows," Kennedy began, "but Corvus won't take this lying down. We need to press our advantage." He outlined a bold plan to cripple Kazon production and lure their fleets out of position, but not everyone agreed. Captain Reyes spoke up. "With respect, sir, we should conserve our strength. Maybe even reach out to other species chafing under council rule." The debate grew heated. Some backed Kennedy's aggressive stance, others argued for caution. As the arguments raged on, one thing was clear. The choices they made now would determine the fate of humanity. The command deck fell silent as Kennedy's fist slammed onto the holotable. "We hit them hard and fast," he declared, eyes blazing. "No more debates. No more caution." Captain Reyes opened his mouth to object, but Kennedy cut him off with a sharp gesture. "I've made my decision." Hours later, Lieutenant Marcus Kane crouched in the sulphurous shadows of Rhinax, sweat beading on his forehead despite his suit's cooling systems. The planet's surface roiled with geothermal activity, geysers of superheated steam erupting around them. "Team 2, status," Kane whispered into his comms. "In position, awaiting your signal." Kane nodded to his demolitions expert. "Let's crack this egg." The shaped charges detonated with pinpoint precision, carving a tunnel through solid rock. As alarms blared, Kane's team surged forward, engaging Kazon guards in a brutal firefight. Plasma bolts sizzled past Kane's head as he dove for cover. "Push forward!" he shouted, returning fire. They fought their way deeper into the facility, leaving a trail of Kazon bodies in their wake. Finally, they reached the main dilithium storage vault. "Plant the charges," Kane ordered. "We've got 5 minutes before this whole place goes up." As his team worked, Kane's calm crackled to life. "Sir, we've got company, a lot of company." Kane cursed. "Fall back to the extraction point. We'll hold them here." The next few minutes were a blur of gunfire and explosions. Kane's muscles burned as he dragged a wounded comrade to safety. Just as it seemed they'd be overwhelmed, the charges detonated. The facility shuddered as vast underground veins cracked open. Dilithium crystals, exposed to Rhinax's corrosive atmosphere, began to degrade almost instantly. "Move!" Kane shouted as the complex started to collapse around them. They barely made it to their stealth ship, rocketing away from the disintegrating facility. As they broke atmosphere, Kane allowed himself a grim smile. The Kazan had just lost their biggest dilithium stockpile. Meanwhile, light years away, Captain Kennedy stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching Corvus's armada approach on long-range sensors. "All ships assume attack formation," Kennedy ordered. "Prepare to spring the trap." The human fleet darted between treacherous stellar anomalies, drawing the Kazan deeper into the star cluster. Corvus took the bait, his massive warships lumbering after them. Kennedy's voice was ice-cold as he gave the command, "Detonate the warheads." Space lit up with antimatter explosions. The resulting shockwave tore through the Kazan formation, overloading shields and rupturing hulls. Corvus's once mighty armada fractured, ships spinning out of control or exploding outright. But even as Kennedy allowed himself a moment of triumph, reports flooded in of Kazon retribution. Inhabited worlds, suspected of harboring human sympathizers, were being bombarded from orbit. Kennedy watched in horror as the casualty reports mounted. Millions dead. Entire civilizations wiped out in Corvus's rage. "Sir," his communications officer reported, voice shaking. "We're receiving transmissions from multiple systems. They're pledging support to our cause." Kennedy nodded grimly. Corvus had finally gone too far. The tide was turning. Days later, Lieutenant Erica Mendoza stood before Kennedy, her face a mask of willpower. "I volunteer for this mission, sir," she said, voice steady despite the haunted look in her eyes. Kennedy studied her carefully. "You understand the risks?" Mendoza nodded. "After what Corvus did to me, to all of us, I need to see this through." Kennedy clasped her shoulder. "Bring that bastard in, Lieutenant, dead or alive." Mendoza's stealth team ghosted through Corvus's command post, neutralizing guards with silent efficiency. They fought their way through twisting corridors, drawing ever closer to their target. As they breached the final security door, Mendoza's heart raced. This was it. Corvus was just beyond. But as they burst into the room, klaxons blared. Mendoza's eyes widened as she saw the pulsing devices lining the walls. "Thermal crypt!" she shouted. "Everyone out now!" They sprinted for the exit as the complex began to shake itself apart. Heat seared Mendoza's back as she dove through closing blast doors. Gasping for breath, she watched as Corvus's command center imploded in a fiery conflagration. Of Corvus himself, there was no sign. Back on the flagship, Kennedy received Mendoza's report with a heavy heart. Despite all their victories, the architect of humanity's suffering remained at large. As he looked out at the stars, Kennedy knew the war was far from finished. But for the first time in 500,000 years, hope flickered in the darkness.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.